when I was 22 and I saw a therapist for the first time,
Mm.
I made the mistake of telling my mother that I was going. And so after my first session, I didn't go again for another year.
Oh, you only went once.
I only went once because my mother was extremely angry with me that I went. And she said that there was nothing wrong with me and that if I'm stressed, she could help me. And I just didn't understand. I didn't have the mental capacity to understand that the source of my stress was her.
'Cause everything feels bigger. It's all fire, and little stones become boulders when they're held for long enough. Skipping stones across that river.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset, or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Today I'm joined by Marie Ellis, and today we're going to be talking about narcissist mother.
Yes.
If you're listening, have an open mind, and we hope you can learn something from this episode. Marie, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, James?
Good. I'm fine. I'm great now. And where are you based again?
Right now, I am based in Utah, USA. We just moved here from the Seattle, Washington area.
Is that, I'm not familiar with the American map. Is that near or or are they next to each other?
They are not next to each other.
Okay. Okay.
So Washington State is on the west coast, so it's right by
Mm.
the Pacific Ocean. And then Utah is inland. It's a desert, and it's brown and not very pretty. But in the winter, it's nice because it snows.
So it looks nice for pictures.
Yes.
Yeah.
Utah is where celebrities come to snowboard and ski. So,
Oh,
yeah.
nice. Yeah. Yes. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, I would love to. So, my name is Marie, and I recently left the corporate world to become a narcissistic abuse recovery coach. I was born and raised in Singapore, and I've lived in the US for about 10 years now. I am also a military wife, and I have a beautiful baby boy, and I am very busy helping people every day and serving my family. I love my life.
Yeah. Oh, sounds amazing. You got sick of the corporate world.
Yes and no. I'm grateful for the jobs that I've had because now that I am my own business owner, having my own coaching business, I'm grateful for what I learned in the corporate world.
Mm.
So there's good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Before we get going, we're just going to play a quickie game called One for
Okay.
One. I'll give
Okay.
you a word and you say the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay. You ready? These are just
Yes, I'm
random words, so
ready.
that don't mean, don't think too much into them. Okay.
Okay.
The first one is relief.
Surrender.
The second one is turquoise.
Jade. I'm Chinese, so I love jade jewelry.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now I'm thinking about it. And sorry, the third word is dreams.
Reality.
Connection.
Essential.
And the last one is fearless. You overthinking?
So many words came to my mind, and I have to pick one. Possible.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. Simple. Simple. Okay.
That was a
Sorry,
wonderful game.
I just like to play it at the start. um. Okay. Okay. We get going in our conversation today, and a lot of it would be around your childhood. So we start from the top. First question is, how was childhood growing up?
My childhood was very chaotic. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm from Singapore. That's where I'm from.
Mm,
My mother is Singaporean Chinese, and my father is a white American. And growing up, I thought it was very normal for yelling and screaming to happen every day. And yet we would go to church and go to different social events, whether a family member was getting married or
mm,
whatever it was. And we had to be quiet, be obedient. We weren't allowed to share our thoughts and opinions. And I thought it was normal until I became a teenager and I started making more friends and going to friends' homes to have a sleepover. And my there was this one time my best friend's mother had asked me my opinion on something. And I thought it was so bizarre. I was like, "You want to know how I feel? You
Can
want
I?
to know my thoughts?" I thought it was so interesting. But it made me feel so good. It made me feel seen. And I
Mm,
had never felt that way before. And as I grew up, I started to clash more and more with my mother. And she would call me names and say that I'm a terrible daughter for not listening. And I just thought it was normal. I
mm,
thought that everyone had tumultuous relationships with their parents, and that eventually led me to be in relationships with men who were similar to my mother. And it wasn't until I was about 22, I believe, I decided to see a therapist. And I
mm.
made the mistake of telling my mother, and I will never forget what she said. She said, "What will people think?" She was so embarrassed that I was asking for help. I was very depressed. I was in a very dark place. And her first words out of her mouth weren't like, "Are you okay? Like, can someone go with you? Why do you feel depressed?" Her first words were, "What will people think?" She was more concerned about her image and her reputation. Because
Then,
for her, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, because, yeah, she was more concerned about the look of the family rather than what you actually thinking. And did you have, was it a big family you came from?
So my nucleus family, my immediate family, I have my parents and I have a younger brother.
Mm,
But my grandfather on my mother's side, my maternal grandfather, is the oldest of 12. And he did get married when he was 18. So growing up, his siblings would be at our house all the time. my extended family. So I was very used to just a lot of people at my house all the
Being
time,
around.
very
Yeah,
loud.
yeah. And the relationship between yourself and your brother and your mother, was it different? Looking back
It
now, obviously at the time you wouldn't have known. Was
hmm,
it a different, like, did she have a different relationship with him than she did with you?
yes, completely different. I see it as we were raised by different mothers
Okay.
because
Oh.
as the older sibling, I felt like I had to protect him from her
Mm.
unspoken rules. And as I got older, I would be like, "Oh, don't do that. Mom doesn't like that." Because I had experienced her verbal lashings all my
Mm.
life. But then when he would do something that she previously didn't like, that I did, when he would do the exact same thing, he would be praised or
Oh.
she would help him. It was it was very we've had very different experiences. And we've come a long way because one of the things of having a narcissistic parent is that they pit children against each other, they pit siblings against each other. And I
Mm.
used to be extremely jealous of my brother because of the way my mother would talk about him. Like, look at your brother, he did so well in school. He got into this great school, but you didn't. And and it would cause resentment in me for him.
Mm.
And it's taken many years and many, many conversations, but my brother and I are in a good place right now. And even though he doesn't agree with some of the things that I believe and some of the boundaries that I've set when it comes to our parents, but he does accept that we have different childhood
Mm.
experiences and we've been able to move on.
Yeah, I suppose for him, he wouldn't have felt what you felt. So for him, he probably thinks that, well, far as he's aware, childhood was good, but the two of you were being raised by two different parents. Well, one parent with two different personalities. Yeah.
Exactly. And I also did want to share with you, James, and your listeners, when I was 22 and I saw a therapist for the first time,
Mm.
I made the mistake of telling my mother that I was going. And so after my first session, I didn't go again for another year.
Oh, you only went once.
I only went once because my mother was extremely angry with me that I went. And she said that there was nothing wrong with me and that if I'm stressed, she could help me. And I just didn't understand. I didn't have the mental capacity to understand that the source of my stress was her.
Yes. Oh,
It
yeah.
took me a long time, and it wasn't until actually my third therapist. So I'm sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. So a year after that first
Mm.
session, I was
Yes.
talking to a friend. And he said, Marie, what you're going through, I think you need to seek professional help. And I was like, no, like I'm strong. And I was repeating what my mother had said to me. And my friend
Mm.
said, yes, you are strong and you can still ask for help. And that really made an impact on me because I was raised to think that asking for help was a bad thing. And so I decided to go again, but this time I had learned my lesson, so I didn't tell my mother that I went. And
Mm.
so I had actually been going for years until she
Okay.
had she had found out again from a family member that I was going, and because I was changing and growing, she suddenly was like, "I'm so glad it's been working for you." And I remember thinking, this is so weird that you're saying that because the first time I went, you
You
didn't
didn't.
want me to go.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until my third therapist who told me about narcissism. And that's when my life changed forever. And it helped me to understand why my mother is the way she is and that I'm not crazy.
Yeah, yeah. It's only like that when you hear about it and you learn about it, all of a sudden everything start making sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was very validating that
Mm,
I was just a child and that I wasn't supposed to be her emotional support person, and that I'm allowed to have my own thoughts and opinions and I am my own individual. Because
mm,
that's one of the things of having a narcissistic parent, is that their children are an extension of them. They don't
mm.
allow individuality and makes them very uncomfortable because you are more of like a pawn or a minion to them.
Yeah.
And my emotional abuse from my mother was even worse because she's not only narcissistic, but she's also Chinese. And in Chinese culture, filial piety is very, very important. The respect and loyalty you have to your
For,
elders
yes. Yeah.
cannot be
So
questioned. You
no.
have to you have to be respectful even if they treat you terribly. And so that's something that I had to break out of as
Mm.
well.
So even so she would have grown up with that mentality, and she was just repeating what she knew when she had you. But she wasn't repeating it with your brother, which is it's a bit odd.
So in a narcissistic family, the there's the narcissistic parent, and usually their spouse is an enabler. And I saw my dad enable my mother's abuse. And there's usually three types of children. There is what psychologists call the scapegoat child, which was
Mm,
me. And the scapegoat, they can sense that something is wrong. They are usually the ones that clash the most with the narcissistic parent, and they get all the negative attention from the narcissistic parent.
yeah.
And then the second kind of child in a narcissistic family is the golden child. And the golden child gets the positive attention from the narcissistic parent. And they treat them very, very different from the scapegoat child. They receive praise. They are basically an extension of
Mm,
the narcissistic parent's good traits. And then the third kind of child, if there are more than two children, is the invisible child. And so they
oh
are
yeah.
the most neglected and they don't get positive or negative attention.
Yeah. They're like the lost child. No one knows they're just in the family,
Exactly.
but they don't really, yeah,
Hmm.
they don't really get the backlash as much because they learned just to be in the background. Yeah. And being a scapegoat child, you would have grown up very angry child. Did you grow up angry child?
I was so angry. I felt so bad, especially when I was in junior college in Singapore. Junior college is 16 to 18. And I played football, soccer, football.
Yeah.
And I was really mean. I hurt some girls that I played with. I feel so bad. I
That
was,
was
yeah, I was a very angry teenager. But one of the blessings too of being a teenager in like the early 2010s period is we have the internet, and the internet was improving. I remember being 15 and using my father's computer and typing into Google, why is my mother nice to everyone but me? And back then, not much popped up. But if you type it now,
oh
you'll see
yes.
articles on narcissistic parents, narcissistic mothers, how to heal from them. And it
Mm,
technology is just amazing. And I'm grateful that more and more people are able to break free from
mm.
narcissistic abuse and control.
And would your behavior was it different at home compared to when you're out? Because at home you just had to soak up all the whatever was being said to you.
Exactly. At home, I was to be seen but not heard. And then outside the home, I had to be what my mother wanted me to be, which was to be a good girl, to be obedient. And I mean, I remember we would go to church and we would just sit there quietly. And after church, sometimes people would come up to my parents and say, "Oh, you and your children are so well behaved." And my mother would
Yeah.
love it. She'd eat it up. She's like, "Yes." Because that's one of the traits of narcissism. They love praise and they love being the center of attention. And we would go home and my brother and I would be yelling and she would just ignore us. As long as we didn't behave like that in front of other people, she
She was,
wasn't paying attention to what we were doing.
yeah. And was there a lot of gaslighting when you're growing up? Can you remember? Like, was she saying you said things you never said, or you telling a story and her saying that didn't happen type of thing?
Yes, going back to the example of when she told me she didn't want to go to therapy, and then a couple of years later, when I had brought it up, she said that she would never say something like that, and that my well-being is of the greatest importance to her. And I actually have a folder for my safety. I have screenshots, many, many screenshots of emails, WhatsApp messages of horrible things she said to me. And and because you have to protect yourself from a narcissist when they do gaslight so that you have proof of when they said something and then later on they said that they didn't.
Especially, yeah, because they can be so convincing to other people that they will get believed, and you've been there in shock, going, how's this happening?
And it makes you question yourself. And that's why when I first learned about narcissism, it was so comforting to me and validating because I thought I was going crazy. You can go crazy when you're being gaslighted. When
Yeah, you
when
don't
you're
even
exactly when you're
you don't
told
remember
one thing.
yeah,
Mhm.
your memories are like, you start questioning yourself. Did that really happen? Did I really think this or said this? So, and your father, like, was he involved that much, or did he just kind of, was he aware of what was happening?
Yes, and my father and I have had many talks about my mother's narcissism and her emotional abuse towards us. It is a very sad situation because he does take most of her abuse. It goes to him. And I remember when I first learned about narcissism, I was very angry for a while. Like, why would my mother treat me this way? Why would she not go get help? But then as I started to learn more and I learned about how narcissistic spouses and how they treat their
Their partner.
spouses, their
Yeah.
partner, it is not to compare suffering or pain, but sometimes it's worse than the way they treat their children. And so I really have empathy for my father. He's a very kind and loving man, and I'm grateful that he is my father because growing up I was very depressed and he would notice and comfort me and provide love for me. And so if not for him, to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't be alive.
Okay. So he did try to help, but yeah, for
But
him,
it wasn't consistent. So that's
yeah.
what is difficult because with children, it's very important to be consistent and to show them that you are available.
Mm.
But sometimes my dad would comfort me, and then sometimes he would be like, "Oh, your mother's very stressed. That's why she threw that
She's
cup at you." And I'm like, "But I'm not. It's not my fault she's stressed. If she's stressed at work, then she needs to deal with work. She can't take it out on me." And it wasn't
mm.
until I was an adult that I realized that my mother had been using me as a punching bag for years. And I've also, besides forgiving my mother for the way she treated me, I've also had to forgive my father for not protecting me.
Mm. So the abuse was physical and emotional abuse.
Yes, but definitely more emotional.
Mm. Yeah, Jesus, that's. Did you like when you're a teenager? Obviously, sorry. When you're a teenager, did you find it hard to relate to your friends when you're going to school and things like that?
Yes. I looking back now, I was really, really awkward because I would sometimes sit in their homes and I would wait for an adult to start yelling or screaming. But then it wouldn't happen. And I'm
Yeah,
like, wait,
what's
so
happening?
in TVs and movies, it can actually be real where families are happy
Yeah.
and they talk things out if there's a disagreement and they go to bed. I growing up, I spent many, many nights crying myself to sleep, many nights. And no one would come and check on me.
Mm.
Sometimes my brother would tell me to cry more quietly because I was waking him up.
Jeez, that's not very nice.
Yeah, because he and my mother are very similar in the sense that they lack empathy. And so
Mm.
because that was what was modeled to my brother at that time.
Mm.
So
Mm.
I mean, he was also a child, so his sense of reality was just what he knew, which
Yeah.
was what my parents modeled to us.
Mm. And in your 20s, did that have effect on your relationship with other people? Like, did you obviously you would have grown up with very low self-esteem, questioning a lot of your thoughts.
Yes, and growing up with a narcissistic parent and having low self-esteem causes you to attract narcissistic partners. And going back to with my therapist who first taught me about narcissism, the reason why she had brought it up was because of the guy I was dating at the time
Okay.
and that he had narcissistic traits. And then as I learned more about narcissism, I'm like, oh, like my mother's like this too. Like she just wants me to keep quiet and um
Mm.
my
You.
and the guy I was dating at the time was like that too. Like he wanted to be the one to choose everything and I was just supposed to be submissive and follow along.
Mm. So you just attracted when you unconsciously knew, even though you knew the behavior was bad, but you somehow ended up attracting the same character.
Exactly. My mother was emotionally unavailable and so I was dating emotionally unavailable men who were hot and cold, just like my
Mm.
mother. They would be so loving one day and then the next day completely ignore me. And I would be like, okay, I'm done. This guy is unstable, he's toxic. And then the next day, call me up. Look outside
Mm.
your door, there's something for you. And I would feel so loved. And I would forget the terrible treatment that I previously
Mm.
had. And so it's very, very similar to the kind of relationship that I had with my mother where I would love and hate her in equal measure.
And do you think, looking back now, there's a part of you that was hoping that he would be different?
Yes, because I felt that with my mother as well,
That one day,
that one day she would change for me because she loved me.
did you ever have this kind of conversation with her?
Yes, we've had in the past, but they were just really, really horrible. She
Was
would
it more
get
of an,
really defensive and she was very offended that I told her she needs help.
and did she ever seek help?
No.
No, it.
And that's how I went no contact with her. I'm no contact with my parents right now.
Mm,
And one of my last emails to her, because my father had asked me to give her one last chance, and I said, Dad, I've been studying narcissism for 6 years now. You can't change them. You can't change anyone, not even a narcissist. You just can't
no,
change anyone.
no, they have to. Yeah, it's a strange one because they have to want to change. To do that,
Exactly.
they have to admit to what they are, and for them, that's just a no go. Like they find it very hard to admit to. Yeah, it's like it's worse than an addict admitting that they have a problem. I think anyway.
Yes,
Yeah.
because they lack self awareness. Accountability makes them very uncomfortable. They are genuinely afraid to look at themselves and to self reflect. So if you ask them to, they freak out and they get very defensive.
Mm.
I did want to share with you, James, that my in my last email to my mother, because I was trying to also show my dad that she is not willing to change. I sent her a list of psychiatrists in Singapore and I said, please get help or let me go. And she responded back with a pretty nasty email, and I haven't talked to her since.
Okay. It was okay. So yeah, that is a valid reason not to keep trying because I think you've probably done enough, and you're just like, no, this is uh this is not gonna change. Like
Hmm.
she's not gonna change. So why keep trying? And how did you? Was it because of this that you ended up that you wanted to study this kind of work, narcissistic parent, narcissistic parent? Is it because of your background, or like what drew you to this and coaching that you're doing now?
Hmm. That's a great question. I actually have been a secret coach, I guess you could say, the last
What's a,
couple of years
what's a
because
secret coach?
a secret coach is someone who helps people in secret. because
That's the
now
obvious, but yeah.
because
I
now
didn't.
I publicly share my story. I'm not afraid to share about
Okay.
my experience with narcissistic abuse. But before I went no contact with my mother, the past couple of years I've been in different support groups for daughters of narcissistic mothers and adult children of narcissistic parents. And and I've made incredible friends in these different support groups. And
Mm,
as I've grown, I've been able to help people and coach people and mentor and guide them. And after the past couple of years, especially with COVID happening and we were still living in Washington state where it's very, very locked down, I started to explore coaching because I love helping people and I do have the skill set to be able to communicate with people and guide them, and also from my personal experiences, be able to relate to other survivors of narcissistic abuse. And in my research, there are actually not a lot of coaches who help adult children of narcissistic parents. There are a lot of coaches who help spouses or ex spouses of narcissists. And so one day I was like, I can do this. I can be the one to fill this need to
Mm.
help adult children of narcissistic parents. So I told my husband, I was like, I'm going to be a certified life coach. And it's been a wild ride, but it's been incredible helping people every day.
Yeah. And for your own recovery from that, was it just therapy that you did, or did you do other things as well?
That's a great question. I've done many things. I've attended retreats. I got into yoga and meditation, hypnosis. I've
Mm.
worked with a life coach myself. The thing too with growing up with a narcissistic parent is not being allowed to explore different hobbies and
Mm.
ambitions. And so part of my healing journey was trying different things that my mother said is weird or for hippies. And it's been really enjoyable and really fun learning what helps me feel calm and what helps me feel safe.
And did you find it difficult switching from? Did you find it difficult trying new things because your your environment wouldn't have approved you like even doing one thing? So you're pretty much raised where you do this and that's it. So for you to explore different things, did you find yourself thinking, "Oh no, that's not gonna work," or "I'm not gonna try that"?
That's a great question because I would be really scared. I remember when I was younger, if we go to a school camp or a church camp and there are ropes courses or different activities or games we would have to do for team building or whatever, and I would be
Mm.
terrified. Be terrified to, what do you call that when you jump off a wall? It's not rock climbing, it's the opposite. You're going down. Abseiling? I'm sorry, I
Oh
can't remember what it's
Jesus,
called.
I don't know even. I don't think I'll even do that.
Okay, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would do things like that. And to be honest, sometimes because I was really depressed and suicidal, I would want to fall and die.
Okay.
And but I wouldn't because, it's a school activity and it's safe and all the equipment is safe and there are guides to help us. And I would feel really liberated. So it would usually what would happen is I would start with this great sense of fear and longing for my pain to end when I would start an activity like that. But then at the end of it, I would feel empowered and fearless because I was able to accomplish something scary.
Mm, yeah, I think the thrill is what makes you want to go back again, even though it is very scary. Most things, especially when you're trying, like growing up in your environment, there would have been a lot of trauma there. So your body just would have been a big free zone, just no expression being expressed. So I'm guessing you had to, like the work you did obviously took you a number of years to get to where you are now. It's not just like a year or two.
No,
Mm.
I mean, I remember when I first learned about narcissism, I even went back home and lived with my parents for a little bit. And at that point in time, I would read articles like the safest thing to do is to have limited contact or no contact with your narcissist. And at that point in time in my emotional development, because another thing too with growing up with a narcissistic parent is that your emotional growth is stunted
Mm,
because you are not modeled healthy emotional regulation. a relationship with a narcissistic parent is just full of the highest highs and the lowest lows. There's no in between. There isn't normalcy going on.
Mm.
And so I would read these articles and watch YouTube videos about narcissism. I'm like, no, I will never cut my mother off. But as I've grown in emotional maturity and learned about boundaries, my only regret in my healing journey is not cutting her off sooner.
Mm. Mm. And how was that experience when you went back to the house?
Oh, it was a nightmare, but I thought it was normal.
Yeah.
So I tolerated it.
Mm.
And I did what I did whenever I would go back to Singapore as a young adult. I would do what I would do as a teenager, except I was now a young adult, so I had a little bit more freedom. And I would go and spend several nights at a friend's house just to get away from my mother and then come back and, okay, now I have the strength to deal with you.
Yeah. 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 Um. Great. Great. I just have a few questions in relation to your own coaching or what you're doing.
Mhm.
So this is it sounds obvious questions, but they're not obvious questions. So, what are some of the signs of emotional abuse?
That is a great question. So I do want to say that you don't need to have a narcissistic parent to experience emotional abuse, just for listeners
Mm.
out there. So emotional abuse, it can come from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds. You can be from a wealthy family, a poor family. Emotional abuse can be present. And usually the main signs of emotional abuse would be manipulation, where it doesn't even have to just be the parents, but any family member who tries to use and abuse you. Emotional abuse can also include keeping secrets, where you are being abused, but your abuser
Mm.
tells you that you're not allowed to share what's going on or you'll get into trouble.
Mm.
And another kind of emotional abuse is actually emotional neglect, where you are ignored or you're not allowed to show your emotions. So, in the case of narcissistic parents, they get very uncomfortable if you're sad or angry or upset. The only kind of emotion that they approve of is a good emotion. So, they want you to be happy, which is
Mm.
unrealistic because this is real life. Sometimes we're sad, and that's okay. And so, emotional neglect is one of the bigger forms of emotional abuse because you're not allowed to freely express yourself,
Mm.
the good and the bad. And then another sign of emotional abuse would be unreasonable pressure, where they convince you that you need to behave a certain way or do something in order to be valued in the home.
Mm.
And that is something that is quite common in Chinese culture. A lot of people like to joke, oh, if you're Chinese, you need to be a doctor or a lawyer. But the thing is,
Yes. Yes,
that
I've heard
kind
of
of
that. Yeah.
pressure can be very unhealthy and
Mm.
can force people into careers and jobs that they have no passion for. And that's where people pleasing can set in. And that's one of the results of being emotionally abused, is that you're trying to survive. And so you conform to the people around you and you do what they say to maintain peace.
Mm. Yeah, that trait unfortunately will carry on to your adult life as well. And you you think like you're nice, but you're just used to people pleasing. So it becomes like, oh, they're a nice person. They are a nice person, but it just had to people please a lot of things. They had to people please in order to survive in the environment they're in. Um, Another question is, what some of the signs of narcissist parent?
I love that question.
You must have loads of signs.
I can talk about narcissism all day and all night.
You must know most of the signs anyway.
So, to preface it a little bit, narcissism is on a spectrum. So, full blown narcissistic personality disorder does need to be diagnosed by a psychologist or psychiatrist. And then, on the other hand of narcissism, someone can have a few narcissistic traits and not necessarily have the full blown disorder,
Mm,
but they can still be considered a narcissist. So, the main things to look out for, number one, is lack of empathy. Narcissistic people do not know how to relate to others. If you're in pain or suffering, they will either dismiss you or try to compete with you. So, for example, in my own life, with my mother, I would say if like I had a bad breakup and I would say, "Oh, I am so hurt. I can't believe he broke up with me. He doesn't love me anymore." And I would be legitimately crying my eyes out.
mm,
And she would say, "Well, when I was your age, I had this really bad breakup and it was worse than what you're going through. So get over it."
yes. Yeah.
And and it's really sad because empathy is one of the ways that human beings connect with others. And so that's one of like the major signs is that they don't know how to empathize with other people.
Mm,
Another thing is they lack self-awareness. Like I mentioned earlier, they're very uncomfortable with accountability. And so when you try to share feedback or even if it's constructive criticism, it doesn't have to be negative criticism, but they will get defensive and offended
mm,
and try to manipulate you into thinking that they didn't do anything wrong, but that it's your fault that you are hurt. So for example, if I say, I felt really hurt when you said that I'm not a good mom. And then the narcissist will say, I never said that. And that's part of their manipulation and gaslighting.
mm.
That I never said that. And they will push it on back to you and say something along the lines of, you're being sensitive, you're overthinking.
You're too
And
sensitive. Yeah.
mhm. And they will put it back on you because it makes them uncomfortable to say, "Oh, I made a mistake." Like
Mm,
they will never say something like that.
mm, mm.
And then another thing, oh, go ahead. Were you going to
No,
say
go on.
something?
No, give me another one.
Yeah, another sign is that they're inflexible and touchy. So for example, if you're on a road trip and you're going to go somewhere and you want to make a stop, for some reason with narcissists, they will get really angry and offended and say,
Mm,
I planned this trip. I've worked so hard. Why do you want to stop? But a normal person would be like, yeah, let's, go to the toilet, get a snack, whatever. It's, you've probably heard the phrase their way or the highway, where
mm,
they're not flexible in their decisions.
mm,
And because they do have a sense of entitlement, which is
mm,
another sign of narcissism, that they are entitled to all the decisions in the home or in the case of a narcissistic spouse, like in their
mm,
marriage, they're the ones who make all the decisions and the other spouse isn't allowed to share their opinions or their thoughts.
Yeah, it's like this is what we're doing, and yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm telling you what we're doing. I'm not giving you options. Yeah,
Exactly. They don't like options. It makes them
yeah.
uncomfortable. And then one last thing that I would share about signs of narcissism is looking at the relationship dynamic. So, usually, when you are in a relationship or a friendship with a narcissist, it is one sided. They will call you and expect you to drop everything to be available for them. But if you need them, you're going to be on your own
Yeah.
because they just want their needs to be met and your needs don't matter to them.
Mm, yeah, familiar with that one. And so I have another question here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so how do I get ready for this type of work? So if I have if I believe that my parents were narcissists, so how do I get ready for this kind of work? Because it is scary first to even acknowledge that maybe my mother was a narcissist. It is a scary thought. So how do I get ready for it? Yeah.
First, you have to give yourself grace and be gentle with yourself. Because, like you said, it is very scary and it is difficult because no child is born thinking my parents are bad. Like
Mm,
at birth, we assume the best in our parents. We have complete trust in them. But with narcissistic parents, years and years of recognizing the pattern, the way they treat you, hot and cold, they manipulate you, they lie. It does require a lot of courage. And for anyone listening, please know that you're not alone and that there are other survivors like me who've been in your shoes. And it is possible to break free from their narcissistic control.
mm. You don't have to cut all ties with them. You can maybe just set boundaries.
Yes.
When you get good at
Mhm.
setting boundaries, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the thing with boundaries too is that
Mm,
narcissists hate boundaries.
mm,
They they don't like being told what to do. They don't like being told no. And so part of the healing journey for an adult child of a narcissistic parent is that realization. Do I want to stop living my narcissistic parent's life and start
mm,
living life on my own terms? That's when you know you're ready.
If you can answer that question, yeah. Yeah, because if you can't, then you'll be doing the work, but you won't be doing the work. It'd be
Yeah,
like
because
it'd be convenient. Like you want to do it, but a part of you is still very much tied to the parents, so you're coming and going.
exactly. And there's also that fear that you don't want to lose your parent. You don't want to lose that relationship. When I
mm,
cut off my parents, my most of my family in Singapore stopped talking to me as well, my extended family. And that was something that I was ready for because I became emotionally independent, that I know my self-worth. I don't need their validation. Validation can come from me
mm,
and a small handful of people that I trust, including my husband and my best friend. My family can't provide that for me. So if I lose them, that's okay. And so when I cut my mother off, I had anticipated that I would lose them, and I did. And I'm okay with that because my life is full of peace. There's no
yeah,
drama. It's amazing. It's amazing.
yeah,
It's been
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. It's the drama that drags you back into it. Yeah, and then every year it's the same conversations. I have another question here. Sorry. Um, sorry, just before I get to that one, what sort of books do you read? I always like to know what people read.
I read all kinds of books.
What kind of
Would you
books do you
want to
read?
know more about emotional abuse or narcissism? I also read a lot of parenting books because I am a mother, and
Okay,
also
books.
marriage books because my marriage is very important to me.
Okay, books about narcissism, like books
Mm.
that. What? Sorry, let me start again. What books do you read to kind of really help you move on with this journey?
Mhm. So the first book I would recommend for anyone who's experienced narcissistic abuse or emotional abuse is The Body Keeps Score.
Oh
It
yeah.
is a fantastic book on how our bodies remember traumatic memories, even if our mind doesn't. Have you heard of that
Mm.
book before?
Yes, yes. I still have it on my Amazon basket, but I haven't picked it up yet.
Okay. It is a great book. And then another book I would recommend is called Codependent No More. And what codependency is one of the results of being raised by a narcissist
Mm,
is that when you're codependent, how you feel about me is how I feel about me. So if you think I'm terrible, I think I'm terrible. That is a codependent relationship. And so that's something that I had to break off with my mother, was that I was in a codependent relationship with her. When she would be extremely upset with me, I would be extremely upset with myself because I
mm,
didn't have my own identity. Whatever she told me I was, that was what I believed I was. And so in this book, Codependent No More, it's by Melody Beattie, I believe. She has many other great books about codependency, but it's a great book to start if you are in a relationship with a narcissistic spouse, especially to help you break out of seeking their validation and their reassurance and that you are enough for yourself.
mm.
So those are the two books that I would recommend.
Sweet, sweet. And what sort of narcissist abuse do you help people with?
I help anyone who's experienced narcissistic abuse from family members, whether it's parents, extended family, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. And I also help people who've been in relationships with narcissistic parents. Sorry, not parents, spouses.
Hmm.
That's something that I do as well. And because I've been in the corporate world and I've had narcissistic bosses myself, I also help people who've experienced narcissistic abuse in the workplace.
Mm. Fantastic. And sorry, two more questions. What's one thing you're proud of?
One thing I'm proud of is cutting my mother out of my life. It was the hardest and also the most relieving thing I've ever done. And I'm really proud of that. And if you've never experienced emotional abuse, I commend you from protecting yourself all these years. Something that people who've never experienced emotional abuse don't understand is the emotional toll that it takes on you.
Mm,
And I felt like I had to be a little adult since I was a young girl.
mm,
And
mm.
now I'm free to explore and help people and raise my son without any yelling or screaming or manipulation. And I just love that I did that
Mm.
because now my life is just full of potential and endless possibilities because my
Yeah,
abuser is not in my life.
yeah, yeah. And what does well-being mean to you?
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
What does well-being mean to you?
Well-being means being emotionally free and independent. Because our mind affects everything we do. It affects our physical health, our spiritual health, our ability to make decisions confidently. And as we take care of ourselves and put ourselves first, our well-being develops and grows and becomes more competent to be able to handle whatever challenges that life throws at us.
Fantastic. My final question, where can people find you online?
Yes. So my name is Marie Ellis Cook, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at that name. And you can also send me a message on my website, marieelliscook.com. If you've experienced narcissistic abuse, send me a message and let's get you out of it and break free from narcissistic control forever.
No, fantastic. That's great. It's great. Oh, now thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James, for having me. I really enjoy our conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to. It will be audio, and hopefully I'll get it on YouTube. But that takes me so long to do. I don't do that. I don't do that often. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring myself in this moment. Okay. Thank you for joining us for another episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a quick review on my Facebook page, Don't Be Afraid to Talk, or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends. You might just reach that person who needs to hear this message. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.